Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. I'm Rosa Tulips, and we're immediately going to be starting with a disclaimer. If you haven't already, go watch Isabella's Legend. Link will be in the description. I will be mentioning it a lot in this video, kind of the whole point, given that this is a critique of my own work. But another thing before moving on, this video was supposed to come out a lot sooner than when it did. It was supposed to come out last week, but it got delayed because I was getting some second opinions on my work from friends and a few people. Well, not a few people, like a singular person from Raven Knight's Discord. But besides that, I do have plans to revisit Isabella's story, either in a video where I just redo the legend as a whole, or perhaps I just repurpose her into an entirely different character. But needless to say, Isabella's Legend video, the initial video is going to be staying up, unlike the pinned comment I left on that video where I said I might delete it. No, I'm going to keep that video up. It's fine. It's half decent in my opinion. This video exists as a sort of what-if scenario where I might revisit that legend, I might not. If I do, what I would do differently, and what I believe I sort of failed to do within that initial video, what I think I did right, what I think I did wrong. That's kind of what this video is about. So if you want to hear me rant and belittle myself for your entertainment, go ahead and like, comment, subscribe, all that fun stuff. And without further ado, I will take you to the video. Hello everybody, Rosa Tulips here, and once again we have another video for y'all. So, if you haven't already, if you don't know actually, I made a Legend video inspired by the Legend series from Raven Knight on my own Warden character named Isabella. And in that Legend, there were so many things I just feel like I got completely wrong. And so I'm going to be going through Isabella's Legend in chronological order, assuming you've already seen it, so that, you know what I'm referencing or what I'm referring to, and sort of just going over the story, what I think I did right, what I did wrong, and yeah, so without further ado, let's start off with the cons, shall we? So in the beginning of the story, Isabella is just heavily mischaracterized. Because for some reason, at the start of the story, I go out of my way to sort of describe her as this sort of lone wolf character, which, isn't that bad, It's fine to write a lone wolf character if you want to. The thing was, I never imagined Isabella to be a lone wolf. Yet throughout her entire time in the Iron Legion, all I ever go on about during that time was just how alone and how she fucking mourned her father during that time. I didn't, actually explore anything. I just kept saying that she was alone and she wanted to be alone. Which isn't how I wanted to characterize her, because unfortunately at the start of that story, that is what a majority of her characterization is going to be looking like through a majority through. So at the start of the story, you think that she's just a lone wolf, and unfortunately, later down the line, it's further reflected. Especially in her encounter with Lewis towards the end, it just comes across more as a lone wolf not expecting an act of kindness from another. That's not how I wanted that scene to appear as. But unfortunately, due to me screwing up a part of the introduction, that is how that part of the story came to look. Another thing about the start of the story was the Iron Legion as a whole. For some reason, when I was writing Isabella getting picked up by the Iron Legion, it did not occur to me that I should probably, showcase her time in the Iron Legion. I think her time in the Iron Legion is less than like 3 sentences in the current legend, which is just a major missed opportunity, especially given that in the Wyverndale Festival thing, she comes across a peacekeeper from the Iron Legion, and it is revealed that that specific peacekeeper killed her father. Now, her being part of the Iron Legion at that point, that is supposed to be a pretty impactful moment, you would think. She is basically a moment of betrayal from her end, and a moment of, what the fuck are you doing, Isabella? Like, what? This isn't what you normally do from the Iron Legion's perspective. But the thing is, I spend so little time actually exploring the Iron Legion and Isabella's time in it, that moment basically has no impact at all. The Iron Legion as a whole in the story doesn't hold any impact at all. You could replace them with, like, any mercenary band you could name, and the story would be the exact same. And unfortunately, that is a big example of breaking the #1 rule of writing, being show don't tell, and unfortunately this is not the first time I do that. Another thing from the introduction is just how unbelievably edgy Isabella came across as. Specifically, the ceremony and the Wu Lin. I did not need to mention the Wu Lin at all. There was no need for me to bring up the Wu Lin. You already know that the Wu Lin show up in Heathmoor after Apollyon's fall. There was no need for me to bring that up in Isabella's legend at all. Another thing was just kind of how edgy Isabella came across. She came... Like, I did not mean for her to come across as that edgy as she did in the introduction. Her visiting the Blackstone Fortress to mourn her father, you know, that's not too edgy, but the line about bloodlust I feel like was just a bit too far in my opinion. And sort of left a bitter taste in my mouth for Isabella's character. So moving on from the introduction with the Blackstone Legion and the Iron Legion, we go on to the part where we first meet Asmodeus. Holy fucking... Oh god, there's so many things wrong with Asmodeus. So, Asmodeus was a character who, in the first iteration of the story, wasn't even introduced until like 3/4 of the way through, because initially the first few encounters were going to be with Gaius Verus, and the story was shaping up to be very different. I ultimately scrapped Gaius Verus from the story because I wanted to focus more on my own characters, so having Gaius Verus show up was kinda not really important to the story. Also, if you don't know, I feel like I should probably explain this first. Gaius Verus is a character of Raven Knight's creation. He made a video on him a while back. I think it's one of the first ever Legend videos he made, actually. But yeah, if you don't know who I'm talking about, just search up Gaius Verus Raven Knight on YouTube, and I'll probably leave a link in the description if I can. Of Gaius Verus legend. It's a really good legend. You should go check it out. But besides the point, the first few iterations of the story, Asmodeus was introduced much, much later. And that was something I wanted to fix in this version that is currently upped in Isabella's story. I wanted to introduce Asmodeus much sooner. Unfortunately, there's like 3 main encounters with Asmodeus, and each one completely overshadows Isabella in their presence, which unfortunately damages Isabella's characterization by extension. But also, Asmodeus as a character is very, very flat in my opinion. Like, what can you infer from Asmodeus through all 3 encounters? Is she loyal to Horkos? You can't really deter that outside of her just being a warmonger. And the final encounter, she basically just flips on Isabella the moment she sees her with Lewis. Like, it doesn't really make sense. Asmodeus just didn't really make sense as a villain, and unfortunately, that's just because I've writ her to be very, very poor as a villain. So, not only is the main antagonist of the legend very weak in my opinion, but Isabella herself is heavily mischaracterized. But what about Lewis Ryder, the lawbringer who shows up at the end of the legend? Honestly, I think he is probably one of the only parts of the story I got right, but unfortunately, due to Isabella's heavy mischaracterization, he falls flat. Don't get me wrong, in the first version of his story, his speech had a lot more impact on Isabella as a character, in my opinion. In this version of the story, he's dealing with an angsty teenager. Which is part of Isabella's character. She's supposed to be this sort of immature character who is a byproduct of the loss of war. But it just comes across as a broody teenager who doesn't want to deal with their grandfather. Which was not how I wanted that to be sort of read. And another strange part of Lewis as a character is him mentioning Apollyon the way he did to sort of persuade Isabella. Because until that point, Apollyon isn't really mentioned. And you're probably wondering, well, why does Apollyon matter for Isabella's legend? Well, it's because it's supposed to be a core part of Isabella's character. Isabella is supposed to be a character who admires Apollyon, and later denounces Astria because she feels that Astria is a shame to Apollyon's legacy. That is sort of the main premise of the legend. Unfortunately, I never show this. But I'll give you 2 seconds as to what you think I did do with this, though. Yeah, I broke the #1 rule. Show, don't tell. I told you! But you want to know what's even worse? I didn't even tell you correctly! During the Truce of Wyverndale, and then later towards the end of the story, I explained that Isabella was just afraid of peace. However, I don't give an explanation as to why she fears it. And the first time it's mentioned, it's previously shown that she believes that the festivities that are going on are a mockery of war. She believes that peace just brings mockery and disrespects those who had fought for it. Hence why she hates peace for one reason. I also explained that without a war, she's effectively out of a job. 2 pretty strong reasons for her to hate peace already. But then I continue fucking going on about and completely undermine it by throwing in a random line about like, oh yeah, by the way, she fears peace, she doesn't know why though. What? What was I thinking when I wrote that? Oh boy. What was supposed to be read from that was that she was supposed to fear peace because it meant the end of Apollyon's legacy. I don't explain this. I don't even tell you this. I just tell you that she fears peace for some reason. She doesn't know why. And you literally could not infer that at all in the version of the legend that we ended up with. Because the line that is even supposed to remotely hint towards that is her, like, taking her vows in secret, where she, like, vows to honor her father and his legacy in, you know, his battles. But that's not Apollyon. In fact, Isabella never once mentions Apollyon, so Asmodeus and Lewis are constantly like, yo, Apollyon's pretty sick. Hick, I know you like Apollyon, why don't you join us? And then Isabella's over here like, who the fuck's Apollyon? Because at the start of the story, she doesn't even meet Apollyon. It's just her father who does, and so he fights under Apollyon. And Isabella admires her father, we know that much. However, I don't think that is a strong enough connection for her to admire Apollyon by proxy. She doesn't even know Apollyon's goals. And unfortunately, that really hurts the story. And the reason why I did this in the final version was because in the earlier drafts, I felt I mentioned Apollyon way too much. Like, I kid you not, Apollyon in the first draft of Isabella's story was mentioned no less than 100 times. I'm not making this shit up. I was having difficulty striking a good balance of making it clear that Isabella admired Apollyon, but for some reason I just felt compelled to mention Apollyon like every other sentence for some reason. And then the version of the story that I did finally decide to upload, like, doesn't have Isabella even mention Apollyon by name once until, like, the bitter end for some reason. She doesn't know Apollyon. She doesn't know what Apollyon's goals are. And I literally tell you that she doesn't know what Apollyon's goals were, which makes her encounter with Lewis all the less impactful at the end, and her reasoning for joining Horkos with Asmodeus all the weirder. So what are we left with? Well, we're left with a character who seems pretty gullible, who will join anyone if fucking asked, and basically just has zero characterization of her own, which isn't how I wanted Isabella to come across. I wanted her to come across as an irrational character who clung to old ideals for the sake of her own protection. She is scared of the idea that war will end, and she believes that without war, she herself is nothing. That's not how she came across in the final product, though. She came across as an angsty teenager who kept on brooding and being an edgy son of a fuck. But who knows, maybe I'm just looking into things all the wrong way, and perhaps Isabella's legend actually does properly portray these sort of things that I think that they did when I was initially writing them, but now looking back, just fall completely flat. So I want to explore a few things I could have done differently to perhaps drive Isabella's story to be more in line with what I envisioned her to be. And one of the first things I thought when I uploaded that video, like directly afterwards, one of the first things I fucking figured I would probably change was the inclusion of the Iron Legion. Not so much as excluding them, but as I mentioned earlier, exploring them more. Or specifically the Peacekeeper that would end up killing Richard, or at least be revealed to have killed Richard. Originally, that was it. That was the end of the story. A random Peacekeeper killed Richard, and so Isabella killed the Peacekeeper. And Isabella gets thrown into jail, and she meets Asmodeus that way. That was as far as that went. The Iron Legion effectively just had zero role outside of filling the time between the Truce of Wyverndale and the fall of Apollyon for Isabella. Which is a pretty weak inclusion. But, going back, I would probably write more about the Iron Legion. I would probably include a few lines about how maybe a Peacekeeper took her in and basically acted as Isabella's mother, and then, right before Isabella's ceremony to become a warden, the Peacekeeper reveals that she had killed Richard, Isabella's father. And doing this sets Isabella completely ablaze. She leaves the Iron Legion, and she finds herself alone once again, and perhaps then it's Asmodeus who finds her and offers her a place in Horkos. That already is a much more interesting premise, and a lot more characterization being thrown at Isabella and her connection to the Iron Legion. Did I do that in the actual legend? No. But looking back, I probably should have. Another version of this story I am considering is cutting out the part where she started in the Blackstone Legion and then joined the Iron Legion, effectively skipping to when Isabella joined Horkos. Because frankly, having all that extra stuff about how Isabella was part of the Iron Legion, how she worked for the Blackstone Legion for a short time with her father, if you really, really think about it, it can generally be cut down into a sentence or a paragraph, as all I would really need to do in this new version of the story is, first, explain why she joined the Blackstone Legion. She admires Apollyon. She admires Apollyon and the legacy they left behind. So she joined the Horkos so that she could become a warmonger. And that would then set her onto the path to meet Lewis, and the story would play out as it did. Having it start at Horkos rather than at the Blackstone Legion does a few things. A, it stops me from just straight up making a character who just exists to die in the form of Richter, but also it goes on to allow me to have more time to explore Isabella's interaction with Horkos, what her time in Horkos looked like, and to better explain why she would want to form her own legion towards the end of the story. It would also better explain how she managed to get the members of Horkos that would accompany Asmodeus to join her at the end of the story. Because in the current iteration, it's just like, hey, you remember me when I was like a child, right? Don't you want to work with me now? Which doesn't make a lick of sense, especially considering most of Horkos is not exclusively knights. And all the Blackstone Legion were knights. Another thing that this version of the story would do is allow me to introduce Lewis Rider a lot sooner. This is because, and I want this to happen for two reasons. A, so that I have more time to actually explore Isabella building the Wolfheart Legion, instead of basically it just being thrown out there as a conclusion, instead of having it just be there as a sort of conclusion to her legend. I could actually make her building the Wolfheart Legion the main focus of her legend, which already sounds a lot cooler than the version of Isabella we got. But I don't know. Maybe I will revisit Isabella's legend, maybe I won't. As I said, it's still pretty up in the air whether or not I will or will not, but I'm interested to hear y'all's thoughts on Isabella. What you think her current legend entails, or if you want me to perhaps go ahead and revisit her and do a retelling video. But there is a few other things I want to mention just outside of her story, namely her design. So you might have noticed that the hilt and the blade of Isabella's sword is the same as Apollyon's, and that is because I wanted to originally recreate Apollyon's sword. And the only reason I didn't was because I couldn't get the guard to drop, like, at all. Like, I kid you not, I put in 4 reps just trying to get a singular guard, and I didn't get it once. I got, like, I kid you not, I managed to get all the material and all the armor pieces, all the weapon pieces, to make roof before I had the singular guard to make Apollyon's sword. So I just said, you know what, fuck it, I'm gonna go with the Cerberus guard. It has 3 wolves. You know what, wolf leitmotif, go burr. Looking back on it, I'll probably redesign the sword entirely. But there is one other thing about Isabella's design, and that's because originally Isabella was designed to be a warden. However, as I was making the story, I was considering making her a warmonger instead, and I might still do that if I do a Legend Retold video, because Isabella as a warmonger makes a lot more sense. She opposes Astria, she admires Apollyon, so I could more clearly indicate that in her design. Quite literally having perhaps Apollyon's ornaments, maybe Apollyon's armor, maybe having something like Apollyon's armor or pieces of it on her person. But I don't know. I would have to rep up Warmonger a lot more than I already have, and I just kind of like Warden more. Or perhaps it's simply because I built Isabella to be a Warden that I like Warden more and I don't main Warmonger. Because it was during that whole debate of do I want to main Warmonger or Warden that I was making Isabella's legend. which was a big part as to why I wanted to make Isabella a warmonger halfway through her story. And, frankly, I don't know what would work better, her being a warmonger or her being a warden who looks like a warmonger. Because on one hand, I could give her Apollyon's sword as a sort of like replica made in Apollyon's honor, or I could make her a straight up just warmonger who defected from Horkos and be a lot more righteous. But who knows? Like I said, there's a lot of things I feel like I could have done with Isabella's legend, and a lot of things I feel like I messed up on, and I'm going to revisit her legend. I just kind of have to. Her legend just feels incomplete, messy, and just kind of sloppy writing all over it. But that's kind of for you to decide. Do you think Isabella's legend is deserving to, remain canon, or should I go ahead and try and rewrite the legend so that it makes more sense with some of the perhaps what-if situations I've laid out so far? That being said, I hope you all enjoy the video. Like, comment, subscribe, and all that jazz. And I'll see you next time.